The blood-red sun dipped below the dusty horizon as Arabella Landon crumpled the letter in her trembling hands. The ink still fresh, where Yates Quinn had scrawled his final promise, a promise she refused to believe. "You can say goodbye all you want, Bella," he'd written, "but I've carved your name where time can't touch it." It was 1883, and the Arizona Territory had little patience for broken hearts or second chances. Arabella leaned against the weathered porch post of her father's general store, watching as the last remnants of daylight faded from the hardscrabble main street of Coyote Springs. 6 months ago, she'd told the most stubborn cowboy in the territory that their love was finished dead as the winter grass. Now she wondered if she'd made the gravest mistake of her 22 years. "You've been staring at nothing for near an hour," her father, Henry Landon, said as he stepped onto the porch, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. "That letter won't read any different no matter how long you glare at it." Arabella straightened her spine and tucked the crumpled paper into the pocket of her skirt. "It's nothing, Pa, just some foolishness from Yates." Henry's weathered face softened. "That boy rode out of here like the devil himself was on his heels." "Whatever was between you two is over," Arabella finished firmly. "Has been since January." Her father nodded slowly, unconvinced. "Well, whatever you told him, it didn't take. Heard from Mabel at the telegraph office that he's bought himself a parcel of land over near Thunder Creek." "He's coming back, Bella." Arabella's heart stuttered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's his business. I've got plenty of my own to attend to." The truth was more complicated than she cared to admit. Yates Quinn had ridden into Coyote Springs 2 years ago, a lean cowboy with sun-bleached hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. He'd taken work at the Circle T Ranch and caught Arabella's attention at the Founders' Day dance, where he'd stood awkwardly against the wall until she'd practically dragged him onto the floor. Their courtship had been as fierce as it was sweet riding across the painted mesas at dawn, stolen kisses behind her father's store, promises whispered under starlit skies. But then had come the night of the blizzard, the terrible argument about their future, and her final damning words. "Love isn't enough, Yates. It never was." Now, as she stepped back into the store to help her father close for the evening, she tried to ignore the whisper of anticipation that curled through her chest. Yates Quinn might be returning to Coyote Springs, but that didn't mean anything had changed. She had her reasons for ending things, good reasons that still stood firm as the mountains that rimmed the valley. The bell above the door jangled as a customer entered, jolting Arabella from her thoughts. "Miss Landon," Sheriff Wade Harmon nodded, removing his hat. "Your pa around?" "In the back," Arabella replied, gesturing toward the storeroom. "Something wrong, Sheriff?" The lawman's face was grave. "Just some news from Thunder Creek. Thought your father should hear it, what with his supply routes and all." Henry emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Wade. What brings you by this late?" "Trouble brewing," the sheriff said, keeping his voice low. "Stage got robbed yesterday on the Thunder Creek Road, second time this month. The Garrett gang, by all accounts." Henry frowned. "Anyone hurt?" "Driver took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live." "Passengers were just shaken up." The sheriff's eyes flickered to Arabella. "But that's not all. Word is they're holed up somewhere between here and Thunder Creek, and that new rancher Quinn. His place sits right along that stretch." Arabella's hands stilled on the ledger she'd been closing. "Yates can handle himself," she said, more sharply than she intended. Both men looked at her, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Just saying," she added more softly, "he knows the territory." "Maybe," Sheriff Harmon conceded, "but a man alone on a new spread makes for an easy target. Especially one who might not know who his neighbors really are." That night, Arabella slept poorly, her dreams filled with gunshots and Yates's face, bloodied and still. She woke before dawn, the resolution already formed in her mind. She would ride to Thunder Creek. Not to see him, she told herself as she quietly dressed and penned a note for her father. Just to warn him about the Garrett gang. It was the decent thing to do, nothing more. The sun was just breaking over the eastern mesas as Arabella saddled her mare Penny. The air was cool, promising another scorching day once the sun climbed higher. She'd packed light canteen jerky, her father's old Colt revolver tucked into her saddlebag. Thunder Creek was a 4-hour ride, and she planned to be back by nightfall. What she would say to Yates when she saw him, she hadn't decided. The last time they'd spoken, she'd told him to forget her, to find someone who wanted the same things he did. Someone who didn't fear the vastness of the territory, the isolation of ranch life, the ghosts of her mother's loneliness that haunted Arabella's every thought of the future. The trail to Thunder Creek wound through scrubby foothills and across a wide plateau dotted with juniper and sage. Arabella kept a steady pace, her thoughts churning like the dust kicked up by Penny's hooves. She tried to rehearse what she would say, but every scenario ended with her remembering the hurt in Yates's eyes that January night, the way his voice had broken when he asked, "Don't you love me at all, Bella?" She'd lied then, said she couldn't. It had seemed easier than the truth that she loved him too much to become the bitter, lonely woman her mother had been, trapped on a remote ranch with a husband who was more married to the land than to her. Mid-morning found her cresting the final ridge before Thunder Creek Valley. She reined in Penny and surveyed the landscape below. The creek itself cut a green ribbon through the valley floor, lined with cottonwoods and willows. Scattered homesteads dotted the flatlands, smoke rising from chimneys despite the warming day. She didn't know exactly where Yates had bought land, but the valley wasn't large. She'd ask at the trading post. Thunder Creek was barely a town, just a cluster of buildings around a crossroads. The trading post doubled as a post office, and as Arabella tied Penny to the hitching rail outside, she steeled herself for the inevitable questions. A young woman riding alone was bound to draw attention. The interior of the trading post was dim after the bright sunshine. A heavy-set man with mutton chop whiskers looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, miss." Arabella removed her hat, aware of dust coating her riding clothes. "I'm looking for Yates Quinn's place. I understand he's purchased land nearby." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. "You'd be the Landon girl from Coyote Springs then. Heard about you." Arabella stiffened. "Is that so?" The man chuckled. "Small territories make for big talk. Quinn's place is about 2 miles west following the creek. Can't miss it, new cabin going up, big pine standing alone in the yard." His expression grew more serious. "You riding alone, not the safest time to be on these roads." "I've heard," Arabella said. "That's partly why I'm here to warn Mr. Quinn about the Garrett gang." "Noble of you," the shopkeeper said, not quite hiding his skepticism. "Quinn was in here yesterday, buying supplies. Mentioned something about heading up to the north pasture today. Might not catch him at the cabin." Arabella nodded her thanks and purchased a few items she didn't need to justify her stop. Outside again, she remounted Penny and set off west along the creek. The morning was advancing, the sun climbing higher, and she felt exposed under its glare, as if it could illuminate all the contradictions in her heart. The shopkeeper's directions proved accurate. After following the creek for about 2 miles, Arabella spotted a half-built cabin near a lone pine tree, its branches spreading wide over what would someday be a front yard. A corral stood nearby, but no horses occupied it. A wagon was parked beside the unfinished structure, loaded with lumber. Arabella dismounted and led Penny to the creek for a drink. The cabin was obviously a work-in-progress, walls up but the roof only partially complete, windows yet to be installed. It was larger than she'd expected, with what looked like a deep porch planned for the front. Despite herself, she could picture it finished, smoke curling from the chimney, perhaps flowers planted along the walkway. "Didn't expect to find you here." The voice startled her so badly she nearly lost her grip on Penny's reins. She whirled around to find Yates Quinn standing at the edge of the trees, a rifle resting casually in the crook of his arm. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face more weathered, but his eyes were the same, that unsettling gray-blue that seemed to see right through her. "Yates," she managed, hating how breathless she sounded. I came to warn you. The Garrett gang has been robbing stages on the road between here and Coyote Springs." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Heard about that from Miller at the trading post." "You rode all this way to tell me something I already knew." There was a guardedness to him that hadn't been there before, and Arabella felt it sting. "I didn't know you knew," she said. Sheriff Harmon only told us last night. Yates shifted his weight, glancing toward the unfinished cabin. Well, I appreciate the concern. As you can see, I'm still setting up here, been sleeping in the wagon till the roof's done. The awkwardness between them felt like a physical barrier. This man who had once known her every thought, who had held her through her tears when she spoke of her mother's death, now stood before her like a polite stranger. "Your letter," she said suddenly. "You said I know what I said." His voice was quiet but firm. "Some things don't need explaining twice." A breeze stirred the branches of the pine, casting dappled shadows across the clearing. In the distance, a hawk called. "I should get back," Arabella said, turning toward Penny. "It's a long ride." "You're not riding back to Coyote Springs today," Yates said, stepping forward. "Not with the Garrett gang out there. You can stay here tonight, head back in the morning." Arabella's protest died on her lips as she caught sight of his expression, concern overriding the hurt, the wariness. "I can't impose, it's not an imposition, it's common sense," he cut in. "Besides, I owe your father that much. He'd skin me alive if I let his daughter ride into danger." There was logic in his words, even if Arabella suspected they were merely a convenient excuse. The truth was, she wasn't eager to make the return journey with the afternoon waning. And beneath that practical consideration lay something else, a desire to understand what Yates had meant in his letter, to see what he was building here in Thunder Creek Valley. "All right," she conceded. "Just for tonight," Yates nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I was about to ride up to check the north pasture fences. You're welcome to come along or stay here and rest." "I'll come," Arabella said quickly, not wanting to be left alone with her thoughts in this half-built place that spoke too clearly of Yates's determination to build a life without her. They rode in silence for the first mile, following a faint trail that wound upward through scrubby pine and juniper. Yates on his big buckskin gelding, Arabella on Penny. The familiarity of riding together brought back a flood of memories racing across the flats outside Coyote Springs, picnicking in the shadow of red rock formations, watching distant thunderstorms roll across the desert. "Your land is beautiful," Arabella said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "How many acres?" 300, Yates replied, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. "Good water rights with the creek, decent grazing, planning to run about 100 head to start. That's ambitious." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Always was, according to some. The barb wasn't lost on her. One of their final arguments had centered on his dreams too big, too risky, she'd claimed. Too much like her father's ambitious plans that had left her mother isolated and eventually broken. "I didn't come here to fight, Yates." He glanced at her, then away. "No, you came to warn me about outlaws. Consider me warned." They crested a rise, and the valley opened below them, the creek a sinuous line through grassland dotted with wildflowers. A dozen cattle grazed near a stand of cottonwoods, their red-brown coats bright against the green. "First of my herd," Yates said, a note of pride creeping into his voice. "Bought them from Jeb Wilson over in Silverdale. Good stock." Despite herself, Arabella felt a swell of pride for him. This was what he'd always wanted, his own spread, his own brand, building something from nothing. She'd known it from the start, had fallen in love with his passion and determination even as she feared where it might lead. "They look healthy," she offered. "Strong." They descended to the valley floor, checking the fence line that Yates had begun establishing. He'd made good progress, sturdy cedar posts sunk deep, 3 strands of wire stretched taut. They dismounted near the creek to let the horses drink and to inspect a section where the wire had come loose. Working together to repair the fence felt oddly domestic, reminiscent of the times they'd helped at community barn raisings or assisted neighbors after storms. Yates held the wire taut, while Arabella secured it with the tools from his saddlebag. Their fingers brushed once, and she felt the jolt of it all the way to her core. "Your father well?" Yates asked as they remounted. "Yes, busy with the store, talking about expanding now that the railroad spur's coming through." Arabella adjusted her hat against the lowering sun. "He asks about you sometimes." Yates nodded, his expression unreadable. "He's a good man. Taught me a lot about business when I was courting you." The word courting hung in the air between them, a reminder of all that had been lost. Arabella felt a sudden, fierce longing to go back to those simpler days before fear had overtaken her heart. "We should head back," Yates said, turning his horse. "Get to the cabin before dark." The return ride was mostly downhill, and they made good time. As they approached the clearing where the cabin stood, Arabella noticed fresh boot prints in the soft earth near the creek prints that hadn't been there earlier. "Yates," she said quietly, pointing. He pulled up sharply, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. Without a word, he swung down from his horse and motioned for her to do the same, leading both animals into the cover of the trees. "Stay here," he whispered, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "No," Arabella hissed, gripping his arm. "If it's the Garrett gang, all the more reason for you to stay put." His expression brooked no argument. "I'm just going to look." Before she could protest further, he was moving silently through the underbrush toward the cabin. Arabella stood with the horses, her heart pounding. She retrieved her father's Colt from her saddlebag, checking that it was loaded. Minutes stretched like hours. The shadows lengthened as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Just as Arabella was preparing to go after him, Yates reappeared. "They're gone," he said, his voice tight. "Ransacked the wagon, took some of my tools. Must have been watching, waited till we rode out." Relief that he was unharmed quickly gave way to concern. "We should notify the sheriff." "Sheriff's 2 days' ride from here," Yates said grimly. By then, they could hit half the homesteads in the valley. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Arabella's chest ache. "At least they didn't find where I keep my money." They led the horses back to the clearing. The wagon had indeed been searched, contents strewn about, but the damage was minimal. Together, they secured the horses in the corral and set about making camp for the night. Yates built a fire in the stone circle he'd established near the pine tree, while Arabella sorted through the remaining supplies in the wagon. "Found some coffee and beans," she called, holding up her discoveries. "And looks like they left your frying pan." Dinner was a simple affair: beans with salt pork, biscuits that Yates produced from a tin, and strong black coffee. They ate in the gathering dusk, sitting on logs pulled close to the fire. The familiar domesticity of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. "Remember that time we got caught in the thunderstorm?" Arabella found herself saying. "On the way back from Eagle Peak," Yates's face softened in the firelight. "Had to take shelter in that old line shack. You were so mad your new bonnet got ruined." "You tried to fix it," she recalled, smiling despite herself. "Made it 10 times worse. Never did have much talent for millinery." They both laughed, and for a moment the tension between them eased. Arabella watched the firelight play across his features, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood fall, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Your letter," she said again, more softly this time. "What did you mean? You wrote my name into forever?" Yates set down his coffee cup, his expression growing serious. "Finish eating first, then I'll show you." Curiosity burned in her as they completed their meal and cleaned up the few dishes. The night had settled fully around them, stars pricking the vast desert sky. Yates added wood to the fire, then retrieved a lantern from the wagon and lit it. "This way," he said, offering his hand to help her up. Arabella hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. The contact sent that same jolt through her, and from the slight tightening of his grip, she knew he felt it too. He led her around the cabin to the massive pine tree that stood sentinel over the property. In the lantern light, she could see that the trunk was enormous, easily the width of 3 men standing side by side. "This tree was part of why I bought this land," Yates said, his voice quiet in the night. "Reminded me of that one by the creek where we used to meet in Coyote Springs." He raised the lantern higher, illuminating a section of the trunk about chest height. There, carved deep into the bark, were the words, "Arabella Landon, forever beloved, January 14, 1883. Arabella's breath caught. January 14, the day she'd told him love was over. You carved this that day." Yates nodded, his eyes on the tree rather than her face. "Came straight here from Coyote Springs. This land was for sale, had been for months. I'd been saving, dreaming about it." His voice roughened. "Was going to ask you to marry me that day, Bella. Had it all planned out." The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Yates, let me finish, he said gently. When you said what you did about love not being enough, I thought maybe you were right, that I needed to prove I could build something solid, something that would last. Something that wouldn't leave you feeling trapped like your ma. He turned to face her fully, the lantern casting his features in sharp relief. So I bought this land, started building. Figured if I could show you what was possible, maybe you'd reconsider. But then I realized it doesn't matter what I build if you're not beside me building it. Arabella stared at the carving, tears blurring her vision. All these months, she'd convinced herself that ending things had been the right choice, that she was protecting them both from inevitable heartbreak. But standing here, seeing the physical evidence of Yates's devotion, she was forced to confront the magnitude of what she'd thrown away. I was scared, she admitted, her voice barely audible above the night sounds. My mother, she loved my father so much, but ranch life broke her. The isolation, the endless work, the winters when they'd be snowed in for weeks, by the end she was a shadow, Yates, and I was terrified of becoming her. I know, he said simply, I always knew. Then why? Because I'm not your father, Bella, and you're not your mother. He set the lantern on the ground and took both her hands in his. Your ma came west with no choice, no say in where they settled or how they lived. That's not what I want for us. The warmth of his hands around hers felt like coming home after a long journey. What do you want then? Partnership, Yates said firmly. Your voice equal to mine in every decision. This cabin, I'm building it with a room for your books, a big kitchen with windows so you can see the valley while you work. Planning to hire help for the ranch work so neither of us is worked to the bone. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. And Thunder Creek's growing. There'll be a proper town here soon with neighbors, socials, maybe even a school someday. The thoughtfulness of his planning undid her. He hadn't just been building a cabin, he'd been crafting a future designed to address her deepest fears. I never stopped loving you, she confessed, the words tumbling out. Not for a single day, I just couldn't see how to make it work without one of us giving up too much. Maybe we both give a little, Yates suggested, a tentative hope in his eyes. Maybe that's what love is, finding the middle ground where both can thrive. Arabella looked from the carving to his face, seeing both the boy she'd fallen for and the man he'd become. The man who had listened to her fears and worked to address them rather than dismissing them. The man who had literally carved her name into his future. I don't know if I can be a rancher's wife, she said honestly. I'm not asking you to be just that, Yates replied. Be my wife, my partner, my equal. Be Arabella Quinn, who happens to live on a ranch, not a rancher's wife who's lost herself. The distinction was subtle but profound. Arabella felt something shift inside her, a perspective changing, possibilities opening where before she'd seen only limitations. Show me the cabin, she said softly. Show me what you're building. By lantern light, Yates led her through the half-finished structure, pointing out each feature: the large front room with space for comfortable chairs around the fireplace, the study where her books could line the walls, the kitchen with its planned windows facing east to catch the morning light, the bedrooms upstairs for the family he hoped they'd have. It won't be done for months yet, he admitted as they stood in what would become the front room, but I wanted to get the roof on before the summer rains. It's beautiful, Arabella said, meaning it, more than I ever imagined. They stood in the incomplete shell of what could be their home, the lantern casting long shadows across the rough-hewn floors. Outside, an owl called and the horses nickered softly in the corral. I can't promise you'll never be lonely, Yates said, his voice low. Can't promise there won't be hard days, but I can promise you won't face them alone, not ever. Arabella looked up at him, at the face she'd missed every day for 6 long months. I want to try, Yates. I want to believe we can make this work. The hope that bloomed in his eyes was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, but when Arabella wound her arms around his neck and pressed closer, it deepened into something fierce and certain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered, not just tonight. Stay and help me build this place, this life. Yes, Arabella answered, the fear that had haunted her for so long finally giving way to something stronger: trust in herself, in Yates, in what they could create together. Yes, I'll stay. The night passed in quiet conversation by the fire, making plans, sharing dreams, rediscovering each other after months apart. They slept separately, Arabella in the wagon, Yates on his bedroll nearby, but their hearts had never been more aligned. Morning brought new challenges. While preparing breakfast, they spotted dust rising on the trail from Thunder Creek riders approaching at speed. Get inside the cabin, Yates ordered, reaching for his rifle. Arabella grabbed the Colt instead. We face this together, she said firmly. Partnership, remember. A reluctant smile touched his lips. Behind the wagon, then, better cover. They positioned themselves, weapons ready, as 4 riders came into view. Relief flooded through Arabella as she recognized the lead rider. It's Sheriff Harmon, she said, lowering her gun. And my father. Indeed, Sheriff Wade Harmon rode at the front, followed by Henry Landon and 2 men Arabella didn't recognize. They reined in at the edge of the clearing, taking in the scene. Arabella Landon, her father called, dismounting quickly. You about scared 10 years off my life. She rushed to embrace him. I'm fine, Pa. I left you a note saying you'd be back by nightfall, Henry finished, his relief giving way to exasperation. When you didn't return, I rode straight to the sheriff. Sheriff Harmon touched the brim of his hat in greeting. Miss Landon, Quinn. These gentlemen are Deputies Marsh and Taylor from Thunder Creek. We've been tracking the Garrett gang since yesterday. Yates stepped forward, explaining about the intruders at the cabin the previous day. The sheriff nodded grimly. They hit the Wilson place last night, took horses, money. Jeb Wilson's laid up with a bullet in his leg. He gestured to the tracks leading away from the cabin. Looks like they're heading north toward the territorial line. We aim to catch them before they cross it. While the lawman conferred, Henry drew his daughter aside. You all right, truly? He asked, his eyes searching her face. I am, Arabella assured him. Better than I've been in months, actually. Her father's gaze shifted to Yates, who was showing the deputies where the intruders had searched the wagon. That's so, he asked, a knowing look in his eyes. We've been talking, Pa. About the future, about what we both want. Henry nodded slowly. And what's that? Arabella looked around at the clearing, the half-built cabin, the magnificent pine tree standing sentinel over it all. A partnership. A life we build together, not one where either of us disappears into the other's shadow. Her father's weathered face softened. Your mother would be proud of you, Bella. She wanted you to have choices she never did. He squeezed her hand. Quinn's a good man. Different from me, different from your mother's people back east. Maybe that's what you need. The sheriff and his deputies prepared to ride out, following the Garrett gang's trail. Before they left, Sheriff Harmon addressed Henry and Yates. Those men are dangerous. Until we bring them in, you folks should stick together, watch each other's backs. You're welcome to stay, Yates told Henry. Help us get that roof finished before I bring Arabella back to Coyote Springs properly. Henry's eyebrows rose. That a proposal, Quinn? Yates met Arabella's eyes across the clearing, his gaze steady and sure. It will be, sir, as soon as I have your daughter's permission to ask. Arabella felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze, a smile playing at her lips. I'd say you have it. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. With Henry's help, they completed the cabin's roof and installed the windows. Word came via a passing freight wagon that the Garrett gang had been captured near the territorial line, bringing a collective sigh of relief to the scattered homesteads of Thunder Creek Valley. Neighbors began to visit, curious about the newcomer building such an ambitious spread. They brought house-warming gifts, quilts, preserved fruits, seedlings for a garden. Arabella met wives and children, discovered that Thunder Creek was indeed growing, with plans for a proper school come fall. Each night, she and Yates sat beneath the pine tree, planning their future, working through fears and hopes alike. He listened when she spoke of needing connection to a community, of wanting to perhaps start a small library for the growing settlement. She listened when he detailed his dreams for the ranch, his ideas for breeding stronger cattle suited to the harsh environment. On the evening before they were to ride back to Coyote Springs to arrange for Arabella's belongings to be moved and to properly announce their engagement, Yates led her once again to the pine tree. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved from the same pine as their tree. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a simple band of silver set with a single pearl. "It was my grandmother's," Yates explained, suddenly looking as nervous as the boy who'd stood against the wall at that long-ago dance. "Not fancy, but it's perfect," Arabella breathed, extending her hand. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the rightness of it, not just the ring, but the moment, the choice, the future stretching before them. A future they would build together, word by word, stone by stone, day by day. "I have something for you too," she said, reaching into the pocket of her skirt. She withdrew a small knife, its handle worn smooth from years of use. "It was my mother's. She used it to carve her initials into a cottonwood back in Pennsylvania before she came west. For luck," she said. Yates accepted the knife with reverent hands. "What should I carve with it?" Arabella smiled, touching the existing carving on the pine's trunk. "Add the rest of the story," she suggested, "because love isn't over, it's just beginning." Together, they added to the carving, Arabella and Yates Quinn. Forever entwined. June 18, 1883. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning, Arabella stood in the completed cabin their home and surveyed the transformation. Bookshelves lined the study walls, already half filled with volumes brought from Coyote Springs or ordered from back east. The kitchen gleamed with the new cookstove Yates had hauled all the way from Tucson. Curtains she'd sewn herself hung at the windows, and a colorful quilt covered their bed upstairs. Outside, the ranch was taking shape. A proper barn now stood beside the corral, and the herd had grown to nearly 60 head. Yates had hired 2 hands to help with the cattle, young men eager to learn the business. Their nearest neighbors, the Fosters, were just a mile down the creek, with 4 children who delighted in visiting Miss Bella for reading lessons. Thunder Creek itself was growing too. A new church had been raised in October, and there was talk of a proper schoolhouse by spring. Arabella had started a small lending library from their home, open to anyone in the valley who wished to borrow books. The sound of hooves in the yard drew her to the window. Yates was returning from checking the herd, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. Watching him dismount and care for his horse, Arabella felt a rush of gratitude for the life they were building, not without challenges, but faced together as equals. When he entered, stamping snow from his boots, she met him with a kiss and a cup of hot coffee. "Cold out there," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist and drawing her close. "But the cattle are doing fine. That new windbreak we built is working well." "I have news," Arabella said, looking up at him with shining eyes. "I had a letter from Pa today. He's decided to open a second store here in Thunder Creek come spring. Says Coyote Springs is getting too civilized for his taste." Yates grinned. "Your father never could resist a growing opportunity. Will he want his old room back?" After helping them establish the ranch, Henry had returned to Coyote Springs to mind his store, but he'd become a frequent visitor, staying in the small guest room they'd added to the cabin. "Actually," Arabella said, taking a deep breath, "I was thinking we might need that room for someone else." Come August. It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Yates's face transformed with wonder. "Bella, are you saying?" She nodded, laughing as he swept her into his arms and spun her around the kitchen. "Careful," she protested, though she was laughing too. "Your son or daughter might get dizzy." "Our son or daughter," Yates corrected, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Our family." That night, they stood again beneath the pine tree, now hung with lanterns for the Christmas season. The carving remained, a testament to a love that had weathered doubt and separation, that had been strong enough to begin again. "Scared?" Yates asked softly, his hand resting on her still flat abdomen. "A little," Arabella admitted, "but not of the things I used to fear. Not of being lost or forgotten. Never that," Yates promised, kissing her temple. "You're written into every beam of our home, every acre of this land. And you're written in my heart," Arabella replied, leaning into his embrace as snow began to fall gently around them. "Forever." In the years that followed, the pine tree witnessed the growth of the Quinn family, the birth of their son Henry in August of 1884, followed by twin daughters Eliza and Marie in 1886. It shaded family picnics and children's games, stood strong through summer storms and winter blizzards. The carving remained, deepening with time, a permanent record of love reclaimed. Thunder Creek grew into a proper town, with Arabella establishing its first real library and later serving on the school board. Yates's ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for its quality stock. Henry Landon's second store thrived, becoming a hub for the community. There were hard times, drought years when the creek ran low, winters when snow isolated them for weeks, the difficult birth of their fourth child that nearly took Arabella's life. But through it all, they faced each challenge as they had promised together, partners in all things. On their 20th anniversary, their children now ranging from teenagers to young adults, Yates and Arabella walked hand in hand to the pine tree. The carving had weathered but remained legible, a testament to constancy in a changing world. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes still that same storm cloud blue. "Staying, building this life." Arabella leaned against him, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. In the distance, their eldest son was riding in with the herd, their daughters were hanging washing in the yard, and the town of Thunder Creek spread along the creek banks, a community they had helped build. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "You wrote my name into forever, Yates Quinn, and together we've written a story more beautiful than I ever dared to dream."